Imagine it. The year is 1825. The election from last year didn't necessarily go as planned. Several noteworthy men were competing with each other for a chance to be the president. And that's probably why none of them got a majority. Ultimately, it was the House of Representatives who chose John Quincy Adams as the victor, despite the fact that Andrew Jackson did win the popular vote. Jackson supporters were a bit suspicious because once Adams was given the presidency by the House of Representatives, the Speaker of the House, Henry Clay, was elevated to Secretary of State. Whether or not anything fishy went on, we still had a new president and a new vice president. Due to how Adams became president, that put an air of concern for John C. Calhoun, and he expressed as much to Adams. So let's just say that dynamic duo didn't really get off to a good start. In fact, Calhoun started questioning Adams' decisions almost immediately. The first thing that bothered Calhoun was that Adams sent a group to Panama to listen in on a big meeting between Central and South American leaders. He felt that this overstepped a lot of things, especially the precedent set by the last president, Monroe, about not interfering with what's going on internationally. The second thing that bothered Calhoun was that Adams was raising tariffs, and the tariffs that he was raising was particularly affecting Southerners. And the third thing that bothered him was that Adams was really trying to create this centralized government. It made him uncomfortable as a Southerner to think that states would not have as much say, that states wouldn't have the rights that he believed states should have. So, when it came time to think about the next election cycle, John Calhoun decided to throw his support in a different direction. In fact, to throw it in Jackson's direction. He wrote a letter to Andrew Jackson saying that if he decided to run, that he would support him. And interestingly enough, despite the fact they weren't exactly BFF material, uh, the goal for Calhoun was to put someone in place that would give states more rights. So he thought Andrew Jackson was the guy to do that. And Andrew Jackson was so touched by the apparent loyalty that he decided to not only do another presidential run, but also to poach the current vice president. During that election, there was a little bit of a scandal. Alexander Hamilton's son was now working as a personal aide to Andrew Jackson. In a conversation with the governor of Georgia, it was discovered that the vendetta Andrew Jackson had against who he thought was his rival was the wrong man. As it turns out, when Andrew Jackson invaded Florida and causing all kinds of political and actual chaos, there was one person who was very outspoken about him getting censured. And he thought that that was actually this man, William Crawford, but it was not. As it turns out, it was his running mate, Calhoun, who was the one who was pushing for Jackson to be censured. It was decided to keep the peace. Hamilton would actually just kind of keep this information to himself. That includes the letter. And it worked because Andrew Jackson was elected in 1828, bringing John C. Calhoun back into the vice presidency. This makes John Calhoun one of only two vice presidents ever to serve under two different presidents. The real drama was just getting started, though, and it was coming from Calhoun's own wife, Floride. At the very beginning of the new administration and the second tenure for her husband as vice president, Floride convinced the other cabinet wives to ice out the wife of the Secretary of War, John Eaton. Why, you may ask? Well, it was believed that Peggy Eaton was having an affair with John Eaton while she was still married to her first husband. And that scandal was just too much for the time, and that led to what is now referred to as the Petticoat Affair. If fluoride had have taken less time being petty and more time doing research, she would have known that Andrew Jackson, her husband's boss, had dealt with a similar situation with his own wife, who encountered her own mean girls about their own marriage before she passed away. In fact, if she'd have just paid a little bit of attention on the campaign trail, she would have learned that this was used against him while he was running for president. And that's probably not something that you should start in his own cabinet. Andrew Jackson saw this for what it was, mean girl behavior. But he also took this personally as an attack on his ability to choose cabinet members. So he took the side of John Eaton, and let's just say things did not go well for his relationship with his vice president going forward. Is it possible that some of this petticoat affair was actually perpetrated by the men behind the scenes as a way of political rivalry? Yes, actually, many historians believe that there are many tiers to that cake. And when you know it, by 1830, it somehow got out that the truth was Calhoun was the man that he should have been angry about in reference to his invasion in Florida. So now Jackson is both enraged and betrayed by his own vice president. Then, to keep Calhoun from having any more influence, Andrew Jackson got rid of his entire cabinet, save one man, and that would be Martin Van Buren, who somehow gained favor as Secretary of State with Andrew Jackson before the firings happened. So, in 1832, Calhoun cast the tie-breaking vote to keep Van Buren from becoming the minister to Great Britain. It was a way for Calhoun to sort of end Van Buren's political career. But spoiler alert, the next episode is about Van Buren. That brings us to the nullification crisis started by yours truly. If you ever wanted a really good example of F around and find out, this is it. So, Calhoun was, as you may recall, upset from the Adams presidency about the tariffs that were particularly affecting Southerners. So he came up with this idea, not just him. This was an idea where they came up with a bill that was new tariffs. But these tariffs were outlandishly high, and they would particularly impact Northerners. The goal was to be able to say, when the Northerners obviously rejected this, is to say, ha, see? How does it feel? That's what we're dealing with. Please fix the tariff situation. And it was promised to Calhoun that this tariff act would never pass. It's, like I said, it was outlandishly high. It's not going to pass. It's just to make a point, right? But then it did. It passed. And so now Calhoun was so upset he had to leave D.C. He went back to his plantation in South Carolina to write a protest about the thought of centralized government. In the South Carolina Exposition and Protest, he wrote about being in favor of state governments being able to nullify any law that the federal government imposes upon them if the state finds it unconstitutional. This is where the nullification crisis started. Andrew Jackson did not agree with his vice president, and even though he tried to fix the tariff situation, South Carolina voted to nullify both the new tariff that was to fix the first tariff, the tariff of abominations, and that didn't go over well. Part of South Carolina nullifying the tariffs also came with a threat that they will secede the nation if the government tried to use force to enforce those tariffs. And at that point, Andrew Jackson had enough. He sent warships down to South Carolina and threatened to hang Calhoun if he continued. It wasn't long after that before Calhoun resigned, becoming one of only 2 vice presidents and the first to ever resign as vice president. Up next, the only president who spoke English as a second language.